some people lose everything in one moment. For Linda, it was the morning she buried her husband and came home to a garden that suddenly felt silent, not peaceful, empty. She thought planting more flowers would help. It didn't. In fact, things got worse. The more she filled the yard, the more her life seemed to fall apart. Arguments with her niece, sleepless nights, unfinished projects, a sense that something invisible was blocking every breath. But what if the problem wasn't her grief, but the energy she'd unknowingly trapped with the wrong plants? Have you ever wondered if your garden could be sending the wrong message to the universe? If you're new here, thank you for joining us on Wisdom of Feng Shui. This is where we look deeper into everyday spaces and how small energetic shifts can change everything. We're so grateful you're here. If this story speaks to you, tap subscribe, and in the comments tell us. What plant in your home do you feel most drawn to? Today, we'll follow Linda's quiet unraveling through 5 Feng Shui plant mistakes, each tied to an element she either neglected or overused. Wood, fire, earth, metal, water. And we'll begin, just like life itself often begins, by asking why she could never finish what she started. She always thought of herself as a doer. The kind of woman who didn't wait for things to happen. She built shelves, painted walls, repaired broken fences. But after her husband passed, Linda began slipping into a quiet fog. She'd start something, a new recipe, a letter to her niece, even a small backyard project, and just stop. Half-finished things started piling up. A toolbox left open for weeks. Seed packets unopened. A half-painted birdhouse left to peel in the sun. At first, she blamed it on grief. Of course she was tired. Of course she was scattered. But one afternoon, as she stood at her back porch staring at the rows of succulents she just bought, a strange thought hit her. Everything in her garden was small, low to the ground, quiet. Nothing reached upward. Nothing asked for light. Nothing invited momentum. It sounds silly, blaming your energy on plants. But Feng Shui teaches that wood energy is the force of growth, motivation, beginnings. When that energy is weak in a home, it shows up exactly the way it did in Linda's life. Projects abandoned, vision clouded, a deep inner stuckness. And the irony, her garden was full of green, but none of it was the right kind of green. Succulents, ferns, even tiny flowering bushes that spread outward but didn't grow up. She was surrounded by horizontal energy, no vertical push. The shift came from a stranger, as these things often do. A man at the local nursery saw her eyeing another low shrub and said gently, "If you're feeling stuck, try something that climbs." She blinked. "Climbs?" "Yeah," he smiled. "Like bamboo, trunk that shoots up. It tells your space it's time to move." She went home with a tranquil bamboo, thin and humble, and planted it at the east side of the garden, the direction of wood in Feng Shui. Within a week, she found herself fixing the loose hinge on the screen door, then repainting the shed, then finishing the letter to her niece. Sometimes it's not about forcing yourself to begin. Sometimes it's about putting one vertical line of energy in the right place and letting the body remember how to move forward. If you've been feeling stuck lately, check your plants. Are they reaching for the sky, or are they too comfortable close to the earth? Wood needs direction. It needs stretch. Try adding a plant like bamboo, tall snake plant, or even a rubber tree near the east side of your home. Let it whisper to your space, begin again. And yet, Linda didn't realize that solving one part of her energy puzzle uncovered another. The next few weeks, something else stirred in the house. A quiet tension, shorter tempers, strange restlessness. One night, she caught herself raising her voice, louder than she meant to, over something small. That was when she looked out the window and noticed all the red blooming around her fence. Linda never used to be quick-tempered. She was the one people called when they needed calm, when kids were crying or neighbors were feuding. But lately, something had shifted. Her patience had grown thin, too thin for someone who lived alone. She caught herself snapping at the kettle for boiling too slow, muttering at the TV, getting irritated at the sound of birds nesting on the porch. Small things felt sharp, loud, unbearable. She thought it was just part of aging. Maybe the quiet was getting too loud. Maybe grief was turning into something else. But then her niece dropped by one Saturday afternoon, and they got into a ridiculous fight over garden chairs. Her niece said they were too red, too aggressive. Linda laughed it off at first. But that night, when the house was quiet again, she stood at the kitchen window and looked out at her backyard. Red, everywhere. It wasn't just the chairs. It was the crimson petunias near the fence, the orange marigolds crowding the walk, the fire-toned mums lining the garden bed. Even her porch cushions were a deep scarlet. And that was when it clicked. Her garden had become a furnace. In Feng Shui, fire is the energy of passion, movement, visibility, but too much of it brings chaos, agitation, conflict. It's the energy of eruption, not warmth. And Linda, in her search for life, had overfed the flame. She was surrounded by heat in a time when she needed healing. It hadn't always been like that. She remembered the day she went plant shopping after her husband's funeral. Everything bold had drawn her in. "I want color," she told the florist. "I want the yard to feel alive." But she didn't realize she was painting grief in high tones, trying to drown silence with fire. The solution wasn't to erase all red, but to soften it. She moved the red chairs into storage, replaced a few flame flowers with pale lavender and soft green foliage, sage, lavender, dusty miller. She added a water fountain, just small, next to the marigolds. The sound alone made her breathe differently. She also placed a small bowl of rose quartz near the garden gate, tucked between two calming ferns. In Feng Shui, rose quartz calms fire and invites softer energy into tense spaces. A simple balance, a visible shift. The house didn't change overnight, but the fights faded, the irritation softened. Linda found herself humming while watering the plants. Even the birds came back, and this time she didn't mind the noise. If you've been feeling strangely reactive lately, look around. Do your colors invite conversation or conflict? A little fire warms. Too much burns. To balance it, soften sharp colors, bring in cool tones, add water features or gentle plants like peace lilies or jasmine. Linda had begun again with wood, and now she had learned to calm the fire. But her journey wasn't done. Because even with peace returning, something still felt unsettled. Her sleep stayed light, her shoulders tense. The furniture in her house seemed to shift weekly, as if her space was constantly looking for a place to land. Some nights she woke up and didn't know why. No nightmare, no sound, just a tension in her chest, a low ache in her shoulders. She'd lie there staring at the ceiling, then shift her pillow, get up, move a lamp, and again, and again. Every week she was changing something, rearranging her living room, swapping photos on the wall, shifting her bed an inch to the left, then back again a few days later. As if the house couldn't quite find its footing, and neither could she. It was subtle but constant, that sense of floating, of not being held by her own space. And it wasn't just the inside. Out in the garden, things didn't feel grounded either. Pots were perched but never planted deep. Most of her plants were still in containers, not rooted into the earth. They looked decorative, yes, but something about them felt temporary. Linda had always been cautious. She liked the option of moving things around, especially after losing her husband. The idea of planting something permanently felt heavy, maybe even disloyal, like she wasn't allowed to settle into a life without him. But over time, the weight of not grounding became its own burden. Feng Shui speaks of earth as the element of stability, of home, of trust in place. When earth is missing or weak, we feel restless, unanchored. We lose the ability to truly rest, to stay still without guilt. And Linda had unknowingly avoided earth energy at every turn, choosing light pots over solid ground, sharp lines over round shapes, soft mulch over firm soil. Her home had become a floating island, beautiful but untethered. The realization came slowly through the simplest act, planting directly into the dirt. One morning, she rolled up her sleeves and dug a hole in the center of the garden bed. No pot, no backup plan. She pressed a sansevieria, tall, strong, rooted into the earth, and whispered, "You stay, and I will too." Then another and another. She added flat stones around the base, natural earth tones, soft browns and ochres. Rounded ceramic pots instead of the tall, narrow ones. Even her inside decor shifted. Soft rugs, clay bowls, beige linens. It wasn't about design. It was about tone, warmth, belonging. And that night, she slept through until morning. Earth energy doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It holds. It listens. If your life has felt like a puzzle that keeps moving, check how many things in your space are floating. Ground them. Sink them. Let at least one thing stay. But even as Linda's body began to trust the ground again, something else lingered. Conversations with friends still felt off. Her words came out clipped, sometimes cold. There was a distance growing, not outside, but inside her voice. And without knowing it, she'd begun to withdraw, even from those who loved her most. There was a tightness to her words lately. Not just what she said, but what she didn't. Phone calls grew shorter. Replies came slower. Even laughter felt edited. And Linda, who once loved long afternoon talks with her niece, now found herself glancing at the clock mid-conversation, hoping for a way to politely end the call. She didn't know why. Nothing had happened. But something in her had turned brittle. She noticed it first in her tone, but then she began to hear it in the house, a kind of echo in her living room. Cold corners. Spaces that once felt open now felt clinical. Too clean, too quiet. She'd removed clutter, yes, but also warmth. One evening, as she wiped down the kitchen counters, she looked around and realized there was no softness left. No music, no curve. Just white walls, silver finishes, cool-toned light bulbs, and near every plant in her home with sharp, sword-like leaves. The connection struck her fast. Metal, too much of it. In Feng Shui, metal brings clarity, precision, logic. It's the energy of discipline, thought, refinement. But when metal dominates, it also silences. It cuts. It detaches. The heart starts hiding behind structure. Words become controlled. The warmth of human connection faded. Linda had filled her space with white and gray after the loss. She thought it looked peaceful, clean, but clean had turned to cold. And her plants, all chosen for shape, not soul. Spider plants, aluminum plants, pale dusty greens with pointed tips and pale veining. Beautiful, yes, but the kind of beauty that keeps its distance. She didn't want to erase the calm. She just wanted to melt the edges. So she began small. She added roundness, a brass wind chime with soft curves, a few terracotta pots with textured surfaces, a round mirror framed in wood. She brought in a peace lily, soft leaves that reached with no sharpness. Then a silver pothos, its variegated leaves gentle, trailing, imperfect. Most importantly, she placed an amethyst stone near the entryway, right beside a candle she hadn't lit in years. In Feng Shui, amethyst softens metal, offering clarity with compassion, not at the cost of it. And with time, Linda noticed herself lingering in conversations again. Her niece's voice sounded warmer somehow, or maybe it was hers. But even as the chill faded from her voice and light returned to her home, a different kind of heaviness remained. Not sharp, not restless, just hollow. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from silence, but from something deep inside no longer flowing. Dreams left untouched, ideas never acted on. A gentle ache that rose not from pain, but from pause. And in the center of it all, Linda realized she hadn't touched water in months. Some people cry to release emotion. Linda wrote, or at least she used to. Journals, poems, letters she never sent. But lately, every time she sat down at her writing desk, her mind felt dry. Not empty, just parched. The words were in there somewhere, but they wouldn't come. She tried reading, tried music, even rearranged her books by color, hoping some spark would return. It didn't. Instead, she'd stare out the window, coffee cooling beside her, heart tight in a way she couldn't name. And then it rained. It wasn't dramatic, just a soft, steady drizzle that soaked the soil and coated the leaves. Linda stood by the glass door and watched as the garden darkened, deepened, drank, and something inside her ached, not with sadness, with memory. She realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd touched water with intention. No fountain, no vase of fresh stems, not even a bowl of water left out for the birds. The element of flow gone from her space, and maybe from her life. In Feng Shui, water is the energy of wisdom, emotion, intuition. It's what lets feelings move without judgment, dreams rise without fear. When water is missing, we don't just feel blocked, we stop feeling. Ideas dry up, sleep thins, imagination slows. The soul forgets how to ripple. And Linda, in her quiet effort to move forward, had unknowingly shut the floodgates. She had removed every water element after her husband died, drained the bird bath, stored away the little table fountain, even stopped putting plants in vases, said they made the house feel damp. But the truth was, water had reminded her of loss, of absence, of tears she wasn't ready to cry. That day, she filled a wide glass bowl with clear water and floated 3 camellia flowers in it, his favorite bloom. She set it on the writing desk, next to a small blue candle she hadn't lit in years. Then she brought in a pot of peace lily and a trailing ivy, both plants known to hold water energy, soft, flowing, always reaching. That night, she wrote again, just a page, nothing profound. But it came out like a stream that had waited patiently behind a stone. And for the first time in months, Linda felt something that wasn't sharp or restless or dull. She felt movement, not away from the past, not toward anything grand, just movement. Water doesn't rush, it remembers. It bends, it carries, it returns, and so did she. By the time spring fully arrived, her garden no longer looked like the one she built after loss. It had changed, not into something louder or brighter, but something truer. A quiet balance, every corner breathing with the right kind of energy. Bamboo at the east, lavender near the sitting bench. Snake plants rooted deep. Ferns curled along the shaded path. A wind chimed near the porch. A small fountain by the gate. And in the center, a woman who no longer needed to rearrange her life to feel okay in it. She had rewritten the garden, and the garden had rewritten her. Sometimes we think we're falling apart, when really, we're just living in a space that no longer holds who we've become. Linda didn't fix her life by changing everything. She healed by noticing the quiet ways her home had been mirroring her grief, her fear, her silence. And slowly, plant by plant, she let the energy shift. Turns out, it was never really about the plants. It was about permission. To begin again with something upright. To cool the heat when life felt too loud. To finally root down instead of hovering between decisions. To speak gently instead of sharply. And to let the feelings flow, even if they came like rain after drought. If you're still wondering what to do in your own home, remember her 5 quiet moves. Bamboo or rubber tree in the east to help you start. Softer tones to calm too much fire. Round pots, warm earth colors to ground your restlessness. Lush, curved leaves to warm a house gone too quiet. And finally, water, real, living water, to remind you that emotion is not the enemy of balance. It's the beginning of it. Thank you for spending time with us here. These aren't just design choices, they're soul shifts. If this story reminded you of someone or maybe of yourself, leave in the comments. And if you're ready for deeper peace, join us again next week. We'll explore what your home's entryway is really saying about your energy. Your space speaks. Wisdom listens.